Greetings, all. This is Malik Assad Jafar. And today, our topic is relapse necessary in recovery? Let's get right to it.
I'm the best, so do not test the top of my profession. The master of my chosen field, of that there is no question.
All right. Well, let's address the elephant in this room. As you can tell, I have a wonderful mask on today. The last video that you saw was going through some technical difficulties in regards to my breathing and nose and all that different stuff. Well, it didn't take very long at all for me to have to go to the hospital. Thus, why I have the mask on. But it will not stop the show. If it's on the heart, it's got to be put out there. And here I am. With that said, today what we're talking about is relapse necessary in recovery? And let me just give you some context about this statement, if you will. There are a lot of people who are in the world of addiction who believe that relapse isn't a necessary part of recovery. Well, my answer, that is, to this question is yes and no. Let me explain what I mean by that. If the core of addiction is the inability to manage emotions properly, from my vantage point, then that means that the substance itself is not the issue per se, and because it's an inanimate object. If you were in a position to have a bag of cocaine, a pound of weed, gallons of alcohol, heroin, whatever the case you want, on a table in a room, and you close that room and you lock that room and you leave, those substances are not going to turn off any lights. It's not going to turn the air on. It's not going to be like, party, yeah, it's not going to be kicking it. It's going to sit right there. It's an inanimate object. That would be like saying that guns, which don't get me wrong, I've heard of these statements before, guns or chairs or items that are in a room that people use to fulfill a particular purpose or an emotional dynamic, it's like a person who would have PTSD, if they had to stab some people or something like that around knives, they get anxious around it. Or if something happened in a particular area, they get anxious around that. If the payoff from what they want to engage in with that item is something that they would consider positive or advantageous, then it could very likely be something that is triggering. Okay? So, nevertheless, with all of that said, the source of whether or not a person gets triggered by fill in the blank is not due to the substance or the item itself. It is due to the person and how they interpret, manage, exhaust their efforts in dealing with said trigger. Okay? So, yes, relapse is a part of recovery, but not actual using of the substance. I'm talking about the thing that starts a person in the motion to want to do fill in the blank that's problematic. With that said, I'll give you a real brief ditty of a thing where I got this from. There was a young lady who was in treatment, had an extensive history of abuse, sexual abuse as a child growing up, until she had a friend, a little fast-tailed friend, who introduced her to methamphetamines. Now, the girl who was using methamphetamines decided that this is a good way to stay up at night. And as long as she stayed up at night, her relative couldn't sexually abuse her. Because the relative would come in and sexually abuse her while she was asleep. And sometimes she would wake up. And if she was, if she woke, she would wake up, but she would act like she sleeps so she wouldn't have to be put in a position to tell on her relative. So once she got herself in a position to start using this drug in particular, she stayed up all the time, and the relative stopped molesting her because she was like, damn, she's never asleep type of thing. But this young lady started doing it as a coping mechanism. Well, she got older and older and older and kept using more and more. And then throughout high school, The idea of love and sex was non-existent for her. There was no attachment, if you will. Sex became a means to an end, or of some sort. So she started prostituting herself to go and get more of the drug that she needed. Well, she's at the treatment program, and she decides she's going to leave and start using again. So she gets up and she leaves and she turns a trick. So she prostitutes herself and then comes back to treatment. And they were like, it's a very freaking unfortunate. But they were like, if you didn't relapse, we could let you back in. And she was like, well, I didn't relapse. And they said, well, tell us what happened. And I'm on a panel listening to this, and she says, well, I went out there, I wanted to get drugs, I didn't have any money, so I turned to trick. And when I had the money to go get the drugs, I decided against it. And the people that were there in the addiction services said that she did relapse. And she was like, no, I didn't. I didn't use any drugs. And they were like, no, it was your behavior of the sexual deviancy that you went and prostituted, which was a problem. Thus, the person who told her this was a former prostitute that was trying to work in treatment, but that's a whole nother story. At the end of the day, the young lady said, they did not let this young lady into treatment because of that, and it's a very unfortunate dynamic. So, I digress on that. Sorry about that, guys and gals. That subject always tends to get me a little emotional. Again, one of the reasons why I decided to be independent and do this on my own, because there's just some things that, dude, I just can't handle. The bureaucracy, the numbers, you name it, the irrational beliefs of the people who are supposed to be helping. You know what I mean? And it's just like, for this person in particular, their story ended well. And I say that because got her daughter back, started working, taking care of her daughter, got them some CPS, was in recovery, living life like she was supposed to. But before she finally removed herself from coming into treatment, she was able to speak to some individuals and get some basic information about what was important for her to stay safe. And that was, as I explained before, those emotions that were necessary to maintain a person when they are in recovery, meaning identifying with the primary, secondary, and tertiary emotions from when a person's in their active addiction to a person when they're in recovery and they're dealing with the primary, secondary, and tertiary emotions as to what inspires them to go forth and do something different in their life, to be progressive, to be positive, to be happy, to put themselves in a position to not worry about motivation, to focus on drive, as I was telling somebody before, and I probably have said it here, and you'll hear me say it and again and again and again. Too many times people worry about being motivated when they should be focusing on drive. You stay driven to do what you need to do, and if you pay attention to the outcomes, if you pay attention to the consequences that you receive, and they are favorable and things that you like, or less, I don't want to say less negative, but if they are something that are advantageous for you, those emotions, do it consistently enough, those emotions that are attached to it to help you get what it is you need will soon begin to blossom. And when they do, then you will find your motivation. But oftentimes people don't do because they're not motivated because they haven't found the emotion connected to it. Right? So, and I'm going back to those emotions thing again. But to finish it or summarize what I've been saying in this video is relapse is necessary as long as it is an identification of the emotional relapse, not the actual physical relapse that a person uses and engages. It may happen, and if it does, it's not the end of the world. But what I am saying is that if you could hone your skills to learn what the emotions are that are potentially problematic for you from one side or the other, then you can actually dissect and do as they like to call it, a relapse autopsy. They want to do a relapse autopsy on why I ended up relapsing. You could do one then if you could identify with those emotions. So, with that said, y'all stay safe, be blessed, and I see you next time. Peace.
I'm the best, so do not test the top of my profession, the master of my chosen field, of that there is no question.